Z Zem Zir Zirs Zems.
Oh, come on.
Zemso.
Welcome back to Reason Together, the podcast for Christians who think about stuff. I'm Thomas, here with my good friend Daniel, as always.
And good morning.
How's it going?
Pretty good. Pretty good. Looking forward to a good episode. We're just talking over bounce, just kind of looking through our list here, and I think we've got some pretty engaging stuff ahead here.
It'll be fun.
Yeah.
But before we get too far into that, why don't we thank our patrons over at patreon.com/reason together. They help us pay our editors and help us keep the lights on here. And we certainly appreciate that. Thanks to them, we now have a blog editor / technical editor, and we have a podcast audio editor. And we're grateful for that we can just sit down and have a conversation and have other people kind of take care of everything else.
Get us back to doing what we originally wanted to do in the first place. And I want to say thank you too to our blog contributors. We don't.
Yes,
we have a list of guys who contribute on an occasional basis. Some thoughts of theirs, and it's not that we have to line up point for point, but these are men that we feel like are thinkers, and that you give you something to think about. And anyway, I want to thank you guys for the time that you take, and you wouldn't know this out there unless we told you, but we offered some sort of remuneration to them, and pretty much each one of them, I think, said, "No, I don't need that." But they, contribute, and it takes time to sit down and put those thoughts together, and I appreciate that, guys. Thank you.
Yes, which if you haven't been over to our blog, be sure to check that out at reasontogether.fm/blog. And check out some of the articles there. We recently had one put out by Scott Blair, and it was a fantastic article. There was one paragraph in particular where something was said that was so succinctly put and kind of profound in a way that, I don't know, it just struck me. I'm like, that makes sense.
It helped crystallize
that makes
something
sense
for you.
Yes.
Good.
Anyway, I don't want to spoil it, but go over there and read The Challenge of Submission by Scott Blair over at reasontogether.fm/blog, and peruse what else is there too. We appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, before we jump in to our questions, we have a bit of a feedback here, and I want to say, it seems like there's really been an uptick in the feedback, and I appreciate that. The patrons have really been engaging a lot more, and and maybe even others as well. So we're going to kind of blaze through some various feedback that we've got here. And one quickly was, we had discussed Blur's Day. Now, this was maybe a few episodes ago. And somebody had written some feedback about a 4-day work week and the Blur's Day. And there was some confusion as to what exactly was being said or what the point was. But so he just was clarifying that basically, as I understand it, that he was saying if you get to a 4-day work week, you can still eliminate Sunday and have a 2-day weekend. And so people wouldn't be like, oh man, I lost my weekend because you took away Sunday. No, you still have 2 days of a weekend just like you always did. And now it's down to a 4-day work week. So it's kind of like normal. So David, thank you for that clarification there. That made sense to me.
Yes.
And then there was some feedback on the phrase, God smiles on us. You had asked me that question. What do I think of that? And so somebody said here, I believe this was Omar, I believe it is an interpretation and application of the many times the Israelites asked for God's face to shine on them, or the phrase like the light of God's countenance. He said, I personally don't use the phrase, but perhaps it has some biblical merit. For example, number 625, the Lord make his face shine upon thee and be gracious unto thee. Psalm 4:6, there be many that say, who will show us any good? Lord, lift thou up the light of thy countenance upon us. And then Psalm 119, 135, make thy face to shine upon thy servant and teach me thy statutes. I see what he's saying as far as from an English perspective, that shining of the countenance and the smile. And I will say, from our modern day perspective, it really does make someone's face shine when they smile. I just have to say that.
Sure.
it is beautiful when someone smiles. It just truly changes their countenance and does cause them
Yep.
to shine.
Yep.
In the biblical,
In other words, take the stupid masks off. But
so smile as big as you want, but if you got a mask there, I can't say that
yeah.
you're putting a bushel over the. Okay, anyway, wait, is there? Ooh.
Wow.
um, okay, so my thought going
Yeah.
back to that. Well, you give me your thought on that feedback, and then I'll say a thought that I had, and we'll hit another one.
Well, I thought it was very good. I don't think it's too much of a stretch to see what Omar is saying there, that potentially that's where the phrase God smiles on us comes from. There was some feedback from Michael Larson that where he kind of adds to this. He says, on the God smiling discussion, one of the word studies I have going on is the phrase, the favor of the Lord, which shows up 3 times all in Proverbs. The word favor means delight, pleasure, and acceptance. So the expression that I imagine goes with those words is that of a smile. So again, I can see the connection there.
Yeah, that's a neat thought. Thank you, Michael, for that. I just wish people would see. I'm afraid that I don't disagree that could very well be the connection when someone, the idea of his countenance and shining and favor with the smile. It's, do people really understand when you say God smiles on us? What does that say to the average person? Like, he just sort of benignly smiles upon us as, children play. I still don't really know what that means when somebody says God smiles on us. Okay, does that mean like he's happy with what you're doing?
Because that's kind of how I take it, is that God is in favor of what you're doing, as opposed to perhaps the look of an angry countenance.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of how I take it. And that's why I can see what Michael is saying here, that the favor of the Lord seems that it would project a smile sort of response.
Yeah. And
though, I mean, not to be overly pedantic, God is a spirit.
It's a little anthropomorphism there, but okay.
So a little anthropomorphism. Yes. So anyway, but that makes sense to me.
So the next hope is that people actually use it correctly. Like God's not smiling on whatever they happen to want him to be smiling upon.
Yeah.
But
well, I mean, can I go on a tangent for a second?
Sure.
I kind of out of left field. It's not on our list of things to talk about, but my wife was recently looking at some promotional materials booklets, the things they send to churches like all the time, and you have so many of them, you could plaster your walls with them. And they have like little mugs and keychains and
ink
trinkets
pens, man. Yeah.
Pens. Yep. Where they have Bible verses or sayings on them.
Right.
And she's looking at the ones particularly for ladies, because she wants to have a ladies' tea again soon. And, all of them say, like things like, you're God's masterpiece or something like that. Something essentially to the effect of, you're perfect just the way you are. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. That sort of thing.
Wow.
And while it doesn't say those exact words, it kind of conveys the idea that, as a woman, that maybe you're underappreciated and you should just appreciate yourself, and because God appreciates you just the way you are and all of that. And my wife and I couldn't figure out, and my wife in particular, she's thinking, am I being too particular about my feelings about this, because it's just a mug or it's just a bookmark or something like that. But yet at the same time, it's conveying in a sense that, no, you don't need to really grow. You're just fine as you are. And that's not often the message we want to convey. I mean, not that we want to stick, on mugs like, thus saith the Lord, consider thy ways, and repent or whatever, that would be the opposite extreme. But do we really want to convey the message, not just to ladies, but even if there were, I don't know that there's too much men's promotional stuff that uses sayings like that. You're God's masterpiece. Most men are like, what? I don't care. Whatever.
Break up your fallow ground. Father's Day mugs.
But are we being too fussy there? Are we being too particular in wanting to avoid kind of conveying the message that, you're fine just how you are?
To me personally, no, you're not being too particular.
Thank you.
Because it is The way I see it is, it's kind of a humanistic perspective. It's focusing on the person. Like, look who you
Right.
are. Look how special you are. Well, this is true, but the focus ought to be on the Creator.
Bingo. That's exactly, well, I mean, not exactly, but that's similar to what I said to Rosa. I said they're very human-centered mugs.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I think you're kind of in safer territory when you make them God-centered,
Yes.
Promotional materials. You can't go wrong saying something that is in praise to the Lord if you're going to put a saying or a scripture verse on something. Whereas these things seem to be very human-centered. But no, I realize that probably a lot of people listening to this would probably find us being way too fussy about that. But I just felt like it was something at least worth talking about. Just throwing it out there.
Oh yeah.
Anyway, all that to circle back around here to at least somewhat land the plane of this discussion of God smiling on us. Mm-hmm. I think it has to do with the concept of the favor of the Lord, but you can't legitimately say God's smiling on you all the time, depending on what you're talking about.
Yeah, if you're not obeying the Lord and pursuing Him, and just kind of living life like you want to live it, and then saying God's smiling on me because I'm special and He loves me, whatever.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
All right. Thank you guys for your feedback on that one.
Yeah. Do you want to cover Michael's feedback here of the law of first mention, and then we can get into a little more of the more serious side of it?
Yeah, we talked about the law of first mention, and which is something akin to saying, well, the first time that something is mentioned in Scripture is somehow sort of definitive and a basis for our understanding of the other mentions of that thing in Scripture. Am I right?
Sure. Yeah, but
Okay.
I mean, not just in Scripture, it is somewhat of a general principle of any hermeneutics is that when you read a book and they establish a word in chapter 1 and its use, you kind of carry that usage of that word or phrase with you throughout the book.
Okay.
But we kind of both bristled at the idea of calling it a law on that episode. But Michael writes in, he says, a friend of mine pointed out that the first recorded words of Abraham were his concern for his 60-some-year-old wife, quote unquote, stopping traffic in Egypt. Should we pair that with the law or principle of first mention somehow? Okay, so if I take Michael's kind of tongue-in-cheek statement here to its conclusion, that means if you really think your wife is pretty, lie to everyone about her.
Or don't talk. Like let the first time you talk every day, let it be about the beauty of your wife. Yeah, no, that sounds good.
Right, but I guess Michael's no, it's not.
No,
I guess Michael's
speaking of the beauty of his wife, he was like lying about it.
Right, because he didn't want her taken away. But Michael's joke kind of does lead into the actual discussion of why this shouldn't be referred to as a law of first mention, or maybe a principle, because it doesn't apply in every scenario, whereas you would think a law would. And even arguably, if there's so many, like how many exceptions does there have to be to the principle or law of first mention before we just simply say this isn't overly useful? And that's one of the things that Omar writes in. He sent us an article where, I don't know if you got a chance to read that. But
no, I didn't.
Before we look at that, what were your thoughts?
Well, like you say. Like you say, as far as exceptions, well, partly I'm thinking the vagueness of it. What exactly does that mean? Like the first mention of something, in what way is it definitive? The actual definition of the word, because you say, like you mentioned, okay, in a literary work, well, we sit down and we read a novel, and it's written, it's a story about whatever, and we read from page 1 to 300, and okay, it uses a word in a certain way. Well, the Bible is something that's recording all the way from the inception of humanity and the building of language into them by God, all the way to the events at the end of known time. So, I mean,
Sure.
the broad spectrum of that to say, oh, well, it means exactly the same here that it meant here. Well, we could be talking literally thousands of years difference. Now,
Right. And not only that, you have to establish what kind of chronology you're using. So like is something mentioned in Genesis really always the first mention? Well, that kind of depends on the chronology you're using.
because
You know what I
you're
mean?
bringing into play like Job or something. Are you thinking?
Yeah. Yeah, as far as the potential date of the writing of the book, that are we factoring that in as well
Well, I
with
mean
this
that.
principle?
I mean, I see what you're saying. So, I mean, I think the early chapters of Genesis anyway have existed since the beginning, and so in some way, I think they are the first mention, and they do provide some foundation. But again, yeah, somebody just has to. It's you make if you're going to call it a principle of first mention or something, you really have to do well at defining it and then describing it.
Mhm.
But yeah, since yeah, it's obviously the first time
So now we're going to get emails about when was Genesis written
yeah,
and by whom, and we're
yeah, that's a fun conversation. But yeah, I know I know Moses penned it again or whatever. But okay, all right.
yeah, yeah.
So no, go ahead. Are you going to discuss this article that he linked here about?
Well, I'm sitting here scrolling through the article. I read it yesterday, and I was looking here for the paragraph that I wanted to bring up. Oh, yeah. One point that the writer here of this article is trying to make from Answers in Genesis is as far as the weight given to hermeneutical principles.
Hmm.
So, you probably have done this too. You've read a series of different books on hermeneutics, and most of them at least mention, at least that I've read, the law of first mention or principle of first mention. And they also mention the importance of context, right?
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
this writer here from Answers in Genesis is arguing that the context should be weighted higher than the principle of first mention.
Okay, well, I see.
And
Yeah.
I'm forced to agree with it. It makes sense to me that context should determine that more so than when the word was mentioned. It seemed like you'd be more likely to make a mistake in your hermeneutic if you're putting the principle of first mention over context. I thought that was a good
I
point.
mean, context to me is like almost a given. It's so built in that you have to
Yeah.
understand what if you're just picking one verse and one word out and saying, this is what it means without even considering what the whole
Right.
body is talking about.
Yeah, I'm looking for the example he gave, but there was an example here about the word seed. Where was it? About the first mention of the word seed had to do in Genesis with actual seeds, plants that bore seed,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And then later,
fruit-bearing seed. Mm-hmm.
Right, and then later you see the mention of the seed of the woman.
Yeah.
Right.
Which obviously,
So
you're
it's
right.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to put the principle of first mention over the context, you would end up very confused.
If you took it to that first mention to be a strict definition of what that word meant, because obviously, the example you're giving there, they gave, is within verses of each other.
Yes,
And the
that's
time
right.
frame is within days of each other, the seed of woman
Correct.
and the seed of the fruit. So it's not like there's some, obviously the root meaning of that word has to apply to both situations.
Right. Yeah, and then later God tells Abraham that I'm going to give land to your seed, right, forever. And in the New Testament, Paul cites this promise to Abraham several times. And the writer here says in Galatians 3:16, Paul uses the fact that zera, which is the original word here, is a collective noun, as in the Greek word sperma, to make the point that the promise made to Abraham about his zera was about Jesus Christ. Which is interesting because you have all of history essentially moving forward from Abraham. Paul comes on the scene under inspiration and basically goes, in a sense, backwards in time to reverse the usage of that word. and says, well, that's referring to Christ. Does that make sense?
Kind of, yeah. I mean, yeah.
Maybe the way I'm saying it is confusing you, but
Yes.
the idea that without Paul's mention of that in Galatians 3:16, we might not really understand that he was talking to Abraham about his seed, Christ,
Right. A
singular
singular
seed in
person. Yeah.
particular.
Right.
Right. Paul
Yeah.
clears that
Right.
up later. So, the
Interesting.
principle of first mention, in a sense, there gets kind of reversed by later revelation in Galatians 3:16, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I'm not a big fan of Veggie Tales, but I'm sure they could have a heyday with this seed of the woman, and seed of the fruit and things like that. Yeah, and Abraham, like land being promised to Abraham's seed. There's like a bunch of seeds laying out on the ground, and they're like, "You get land," and you're like, "Oh, that's funny, that's cute."
Yeah, or I could see Babylon Bee doing some sort of satirical article about a confusion regarding the word seed there. But anyway, this writer here from Answers in Genesis argues that the principle of first mention is too flexible to be a genuine principle.
Okay, that's maybe a good way to put it. Too flexible to be a genuine
it's too
principle.
Flexible. And yet I know in some sense the principle can be used and does apply, right? I just think that maybe we shouldn't weight it as highly as maybe we have in the past.
I wonder if I wonder if the thing is people are seeing something, and they're noting, there's a significance there, but they're misdefining it as a principle.
Yeah.
For instance, I was taught years ago, and this has been so helpful and intriguing when you look at words. And I mentioned this, I think, in the other episode, but sometimes words obviously have derivation. It's like somebody said just recently, it's like what do you call it, your genetics, built into say a certain kind, like into the dog kind, is the genetic code that allows for a lot of different variation. Well, similarly with language, language was built with that kind of a variability potential. So that, so just like what you're mentioning, this seed can mean, well, this or this or this. And that's all kind of built into the original word. And so people are seeing, to go back to say, it's interesting that if you consider, you look at a word that's used in this context and you look at it in this context and they're the same word and you're like, how in the world can they be translated these two different ways? Whether you say, what was the root idea from which both of those ideas sprang? And that kind of helps to color, oh, okay, I see the connection between them. Well, to me, that's like if you want to, sort of a first mention. It's a what was the root cause of that word, which would have been more evident, obviously, in the first days of Genesis. And then as time and cultures moved on and languages developed, yes, they sort of developed different strains of meaning in different contexts. I wouldn't really call that a first mention, but
no, I think it relates for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that's valuable to see kind of the root of where the usage of the word started. But that's why I think it can't take precedence over the context. And I mean, we've seen, I'm trying to think of an example, and the only one that comes to mind without having to delve too deeply into it is the word ecclesia in the New Testament, right? We literally see the change in the usage of that word. And I know this might make some mad, but it did become adopted and used differently by Christ himself and later by Paul than the actual root traditional use of the word. It was used differently later, and we saw that change kind of happening.
He kind of narrowed it to a specific context.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. And in the same sense that, I've heard said before, and I don't know how true this is, but the word content, where Paul says that in whatever state I am therewith to be content, that he actually ripped off that word from the Stoics. That it wasn't traditionally a Christian word. It would have been viewed as a Stoic philosophy, but Paul essentially Christianized it with proper usage, right? Not using it in the way the Stoics used it. They would have used it to suggest that we should just be completely without feeling entirely when bad things happen. Your mother dies and you feel nothing. That would have been the Stoic usage of the word. whereas Paul Christianizes it in a sense, but places it under the control of the Lord, that I've learned to be content in every circumstance because of the Lord. So it's not a lack of feeling, it's a control of feeling, right? And there you see the change in language right in front of your eyes. So yeah, I think learning the first mention can be important, but context should be king over it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean it's a good thought. I mean, it's to say, so obviously you're considering what the root idea of that word means, but then in this context, how is it being used? I think they have to be paired. But again, as it's defined, saying, well, the first mention of the word, is somehow defining. Well, okay, what is it? I mean, yeah, and is there? It's kind of like sometimes, is there even a consistency of what we mean by what we're saying? And if not, then
Sure.
it's when we say, well, I believe in evolution. Oh, really? Like what kind of evolution? I mean, there's a variability. Oh, I believe in the Big Bang. Oh, really? Well, there's a significant variability in thoughts about the Big Bang. Did it include, just energy, or did it include time? Did it include matter too? And so when we say the law of first mention, well, what does that mean? Well, I think it means this. Well, I think it means it. Well, then does it really mean much of anything helpful, I guess?
Right. Well, and what if a word has multiple good meanings to it? For example, the word light in Scripture is sometimes used to refer to actual light, like the stuff that helps you see.
Right.
But other times it refers more to like revelation, like information given from God. That there is light. Jesus is the light that lighteth every man that cometh into the world. John chapter 1. Right. So what does that mean? Does that mean he actually glowed? No, he was revelatory in nature, both in word and in deed.
Right.
And prophetically
you to see
speaking.
Things you hadn't seen perceptually before.
Yeah.
Right.
So, using the principle of first mention there almost makes it's too flexible, because the word has multiple meanings, multiple uses, I should say.
We got to remember that word. Too flexible.
Too flexible.
Too flexible.
Too bendy.
You're sort of Gumby-like.
Anyway.
Okay. So that
what else
buttons up the law of first mention there. I think that is it right now for our feedback. Oh man, can we jump into this one that you've got the picture?
Yeah.
The header.
Go ahead. This was actually not my picture. This was sent to me from the listener who who sent this question in.
So one of our elite patrons wrote in and said, good morning, Pastor Tom and Daniel. In workplace emails, I'm seeing the gradual increase of the use of personal pronouns in signatures. For example, you might see a line like this below someone's name. Pronouns, she/her/hers. And then he gives a website that kind of links you to an understanding of this thing.
Well, it actually, in the emails that I've seen like this, it says pronouns she, her, hers, or whatever they are, and it includes next to it subscript that says, what is this? And it's hyperlinked.
Yes.
To what this article is that he's linking here.
Very good. So it's like, oh, I don't understand what you're doing here. Click on this link and I'll give you a fuller explanation of why I'm adding my pronouns. The link goes to a website like mypronouns.org that explains what I can only describe as the depravity of man. Interestingly, thus far in my workplace, I've only seen emails like this from people whose biological gender actually matches all the pronouns.
Yes, this is true.
They're purely virtue signaling. My question is how a Christian should respond. Should we ignore this? Should we have a one-on-one talk? Most of these people don't work in the same location, so the one-on-one isn't really an option. A thought came to me recently to sign my emails like the following. And he puts his name, Justin, and last name, and then his vocation. And then underneath it, he puts born again. What does this mean? In parentheses. Yeah. With the what does this mean linked to a presentation of the gospel. Is this dropping to their level? Good question. Or would it perhaps be construed as mockery? Christians frequently remain quiet. I didn't know the number of meteorologists that were Christians until I heard of others struggling with vaccine mandates. By remaining quiet on these issues, are we simply going to watch the world decline and push Christianity into a smaller and smaller box until we realize our freedoms are gone? Curious as to your thoughts.
Okay. I have an idea here.
Yeah.
Let's answer the question, yes or no. Are we in favor of doing what Justin is suggesting here? And I'll count to 3, and we'll both answer at the same time.
Okay.
All right.
Okay. So you say 3 and then we answer like on the next second.
Yeah.
Yeah, you ever do
All
that
right.
like rock, paper, scissors, rock, and like they get confused,
Yep.
like 1, 2, blam, and he gives it. No, you're supposed to wait till 1, 2, 3,
Are we
blam.
going? Like on 3 or after 3?
Right
Yeah.
after 3.
So, all right, we'll go after 3.
Mm-hmm.
Are we in favor of doing what Justin is asking here? 1, 2, 3. Yes.
Ah. So
okay.
I would say right up front. Now, I'm not saying I've I've considered every angle of this, but I think that's kind of a neat idea. That's what I think.
Yeah.
No,
I would totally do this. This seems like a good idea to me. And no, I don't think it's dropping to their level. Because I think most of the time they're just confused. These people, in a sense, should have our sympathy as Christians. They're confused. They're very confused, and so no, we're not dropping to their level. And I suppose some could perceive this as mockery, but you can't control everyone's perceptions of you. I think if you did it right and you did it in an earnest way, then no, it's I wouldn't say it's mockery. And honestly, even if some people did perceive it as mockery, so be it. I think it's totally fair.
Yeah, I mean, just thinking about, okay, so what they're doing is they're saying below their signature, this is how I identify. And for you to say, I identify as a Christian, that's what I always am and want to be perceived as. Yep. I think that's fair. And now they are going to see that as a mockery if they're really like PC, then you're making fun of this. Well, no, you've introduced terminology into society that sort of displays your identity, and I want you to know very truly that I'm not mocking here. This is how I identify. I have to.
Well, no, and I think it's fair. I think it's fair to ask. So, if you're putting your pronouns here, you're suggesting you believe that a man or a woman could declare that they are the opposite sex just by saying so. And I realize that the people on the left would differentiate between sex and gender, but that's just semantical smokescreens. Don't buy into that. But just by thinking that you are, because you feel like you are, makes you something. That is a faith. That is a belief. That is not founded in anything empirical, and they would have to acknowledge that by putting their pronouns there, they're putting forth a belief that there's no evidence for.
So, I see where you're going with this.
It is a religious view that they are promoting. Transgenderism is a religious view because there's no basis of it in biology.
Wow. Oh man. So you're saying, if they get a little heated.
Let me qualify that for a second. I'm not saying that any religious view about biology, for instance, creation, I'm not saying that isn't founded in anything empirical either. I'm not saying that.
No,
I'm saying to use their own definition of science against them. They say that faith and science are disconnected. We don't believe that. True science is supportive of the biblical faith, but they don't believe that. So use their own belief against them. If they're going to promote the idea that you can change your sex just by saying so, that is a belief. There's no foundation of that in empirical science whatsoever.
And if they're upset, that you won't accept their terminology, they shouldn't be upset with you over declaring your faith, right?
Correct.
Correct. So I have to. Okay, so he links to this website, and was it mypronouns.org, and I just have to say something on the just ridiculous nature of where we're at in society with as regards language.
Are you going to read this picture? Is that what you're going to do?
part of this this article
Because
here.
I need to brace myself if you're going to read this picture, the list of pronouns.
Oh, no.
Let me know before you do that.
No, not yeah. I'll let you know before I do that. No, in the article itself, I just have to draw this out. They make in this paragraph. So they're describing, of course, from a sympathetic perspective. About pronouns and why they're significant, why they matter. And listen to this statement. These assumptions, often people make assumptions about the gender of another person based on the person's appearance or name. Like if he's 250 pounds and he's chiseled and he's named, Ted, then you say, I think he's a man. And like, what? That's an assumption. These assumptions, they say, aren't always correct. Now listen, and the act of making an assumption, even if correct, sends a potentially harmful message. Like, wait, what? I assume that you're a man, Ted. Well, that sends a harmful message to me. I mean, you're right. I am a man, but that sends a harmful message. Well, what is it? That people have to look a certain way to demonstrate the gender that they are or are not.
Okay, so here's the thing. If some dude says, I believe I'm a woman now, what does he typically start doing? He starts talking different. He starts dressing different. He'll fix his hair different. And he'll do more ladylike things. So isn't he making an assumption that there are certain traits that are ladylike and not male? I mean, do you see the bizarre nature of this?
You mentioned that before, and I thought that's such a good point. Is they're basically playing off the traditional understanding of a man and a woman to say, I identify as a woman, but now you can't tell me, but man and woman don't mean anything or whatever. Oh, brother.
Right. And it's fundamentally an attack on reality is what it is.
It is. They're taking a sledgehammer to language, which was the communication of reality.
Right. And without any kind of natural law, as far as knowing what a man and a woman are, then the only way that we're left to make decisions is by the power of law, the power of someone telling us what we should think and what we should do. If you reject all reality, then you just have to create a society where everyone is told what they should do and how they should live and what they should think.
And at that point, go ahead.
No, I was saying, I think, the whole definition of man and woman thing and the transgender thing, all of that is for the relativism. Even all of it is for the purpose of creating a new kind of society where law, where government, where power is the only arbiter of truth. And
that's a good way to put it, is arbiter, because there at that point there is no objective law, because they've basically dismantled language itself. So you can't have any sort of objective truth at that point. It simply has to be power, who is strong enough to enforce. Yeah,
it's all chaos.
Okay, so I have to, I have to, but this is going to be kind of fun. What pronouns apply to you? So brace yourself here. Some examples are shown below.
Hold on. Let me get a breath, because this triggers me.
Okay. That's right.
Yeah, I get triggered.
In through the nose, out through the mouth. Slow, deep breaths. Count to 3, and exhale. Count to 3.
All right. This is threatening my emotional comfort. Okay. I need a safe space.
Look.
All right.
Look, Tom, you're in your office. As sacred as it gets.
By you reading this here while I'm in my office, you're threatening my safe space. I feel threatened.
So is this from that website?
I believe it is.
Okay.
I think this was an attachment to the email, if I remember right, from Justin.
So honest to goodness, as I look at it, usually in English we have first person, second person, third person. So it's I, you, was it I, you, we, and him and they, and different things. Okay, so here's this has 5 columns, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it says here's some examples of what pronouns may apply to you. So I don't know if this is considered like a first, second, third, fourth, fifth person. There's 5 columns, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 options in each of the 5 columns. So the first option across the 5 columns is apparently the pronoun ae, which hasn't up to this point
What?
existed, but there's an optional f on the beginning. So you can either be a or fey, apparently, if I'm saying this right. And then there's a or fayer, and that actually applies to both second and third. And then there's fayers and fair self.
What?
When you add the self, it's just so funny. Okay, so
so you've read column 1, and I'm already vicariously embarrassed. like I'm not just embarrassed for you. I'm just embarrassed hearing this. It's like this is really a thing that some people are earnest about. Anyway, go ahead.
Okay, so the second one is I don't know. I'm not sure if you say E or if you're like kind of Canadian when you say it, or like A,
A,
because there's like E/EY. So like maybe you can say A or M or Ayer, Ayers, or Ayer self. Now here's a couple that we actually there's he, him, his, himself, she, her, hers, herself. Because those we're used to. And then here's they, them, their, theirs, themself. Now honestly, themself, I don't know. That's actually not good grammar, themself. But anyway, but sandwiched in between those is another one I enjoy: per, pers, and per self. So she. Well, I guess it wouldn't be she. It'd be per took per self to the store, something like that. I guess that'd be kind of
no.
And then there's v, ver, vis, verself. Z, zem, zir, zirs, zems.
Oh, come on.
Zemself.
I mean, you laugh, and it is sort of funny, but I mean, there are people who really think this is how we should be talking,
right? And I'm truly not belittling, as you call it, the what would you call it earlier? You know, it is a, I don't know, a sickness, or what do they call it? Dysphoria.
It's a delusion. It's a dysphoria, a disorder.
You know, some people, if they are struggling with this and there is such confusion, you know, sometimes as Christians, we live in such a sanctified, structured environment that we forget what it actually means to live in absolute chaos and anyway, so some people truly live in an environment that's that they don't have the knowledge that we have, and it certainly more easily lends to confusion. Not to say that they don't have revelation and that they can't know God. I understand. So I'm not making fun of the people, but whoever came up with the chart deserves to be laughed at. Okay.
Yeah.
And well, this themself is just kind of almost sounds like you're playing a game like they took themself to the store or whatever.
Someone sent me this meme. I guess it's a meme. I don't know exactly whether it falls into the category of meme. I don't know what meme is all the time, but so someone sent me this meme thing here, and it has a picture of let's see, 1, 2, 3, it's nine people, and the heading is "No wonder the young people are so confused." And it has a picture of Elizabeth Warren, Senator Elizabeth Warren, and it says Native American. Remember, she claimed to be Native American.
Yes.
And she's not.
Right.
Yeah. And it has a picture of Kamala Harris, and it says African American. When, if I'm not mistaken, she's actually of Indian descent, from India. It has a picture of Michelle Obama, and it says oppressed. When, of course, she made it to become the second lady of, or first lady of the United States. It has a picture of Joe Biden, and it says competent.
Oh.
When, truth be told, the man has kind of failed at pretty much everything he's done. It has a picture of George Floyd, and it calls him a hero. A picture of Bill Gates, calls him a scientist. A picture of Greta Thunberg, and calls her an expert. Oh. A picture of buildings burning down at the riots, the BLM riots, says mostly peaceful. Yeah, and a picture of I forget this guy's name, but it's a transgender. It's a dude trying to be a woman, trying to look like a woman.
Caitlyn Jenner, or are you talking about
no,
the one who's doing the sports?
No, it's one who's actually been given some sort of policy or administration type role in
Right.
the
That was the
government.
Woman of the Year in Time
Yeah,
magazine. That
yeah,
yep.
yeah. The Woman of the Year was actually a man. But it has a picture of all these people where you're supposed to not believe reality, and it says no wonder the young people are so confused. So this is true. This is a perfect example, I think.
Yeah, when you just basically state untruth and violate reality and act like it's
Yep.
normal.
Yep.
So anyway, back to that original question. He was saying, if I sort of play, maybe that's not the right word, play along, and where they put their pronouns, I put born again, and I put a link to a gospel presentation. I think that's not a bad idea.
Yeah, and I think it's probably a good thing for many Christians to be a little more vocal, a little
Well,
more
and
forward. I don't mean mean
no.
or aggressive. I'm just saying I think we've been a little too quiet.
Well, and
for
here's the
too
thing.
long.
He's saying, okay, we're being quiet. So what do we do? So you either, to me, there's two things. You do be quiet and you just say, well, whatever they're going to do, they're going to do. Or you take it head on and you say, no, let's remove this from our language and not do this anymore. Okay, well, that's fair because obviously they're just trying to destroy language. But the question is, are you really going to be successful in getting all of society to remove that component from what they do? Or is that sort of, do we almost assume, okay, this is the way woke corporate America is going. This is what's going to be in emails. Okay, so now I'll adopt that. So the other angle is, instead of trying to rally for its absolute removal, okay, let's adopt that mode and do and put our identification in there. Now, some people, I'm sure, if you go to certain ways, we're not saying any method to adopting the world's mindset is viable, but in this case,
Right.
I don't necessarily see a problem with it.
Yeah, I think there's still the requirement that we be respectful, that we be Christ-like in our demeanor and our deportment, that we have a joyful countenance when we deal with people who have different views than we do. I think all of that is still critical to do. I'm not suggesting that we just become street preachers and hold up signs on the corner and shout at people about how much God hates their sin.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's more sensible ways to engage in conversation with people than that. But yeah, I think I don't think we're going to change any minds, really, at least not many, by doing little things like that. But it's those little things that make people aware, hey, there's still a contingency of Christian people in this country that aren't for what I'm doing. Whereas having no such representation like that, people feel a little more, what's the word I'm looking for? Licentious. There is a restraint of evil that takes place when a large majority in society is against these immoral things. Even if they're not super vocal about it, if people at least know your position on it.
Which means they have to express it in some way.
Right.
Yep.
Even in a little way, like putting that in an email, all of those things add up to give people a picture of what society's morality is. And I think it's high time people know that there are a majority in this country that don't buy into this anti-reality stuff.
Good. Well, we're going to have to kind of wind it down there. As we move into the after show, I'm not for sure whether we're going to talk about modern day Quakers or thought terminating cliches, but either one.
I'm kind of thinking the thought terminating cliches should be in the main episode.
Okay. Well, that's going to be fun.
Yeah.
We want to thank you for joining us again. And if you have any thoughts on what we've been saying or something totally unrelated, a question that you have or a comment or a thought, give us your take on it. reasontogetherpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. reasontogetherpodcast@gmail.com.
Yes, and if you would like to contribute to supporting this podcast, that's Reason Together, or patreon.com/Reason Together, and you can choose a support level there and jump on board with the patrons there and join in the conversation over on the message board, and we'd love to have you on board. We do appreciate you listening, whether you're a patron or not. We are thankful for you. We are encouraging balance, developing perspective, and connecting faith to practice. This is Reason Together.